Qatar's Foreign Ministry spokesman Majed al-Ansari has been giving a briefing in Doha. Let's listen in.
Weekly briefing, and we start this week's briefing with the news of His Royal Highness the Emir of Qatar. May God protect him. His Royal Highness on Friday last received Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of UK, where they discussed the regional developments, welcoming the ceasefire announced between the US and Iran, reiterating the necessity to de-escalate the situation and reinforce regional stability. They also reiterated the necessity of global coordination with the parties in order to reach a permanent peace agreement to ensure the global energy supplies and supply chains in support of the global peace and security. His Excellency Mohammed bin Rahman Al Thani, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs, received our guest Keir Starmer, where they put to discussion the regional developments. During the meeting, they reiterated, he reiterated Qatar's partnership with the U.S. in all fronts. As part of these ongoing communications in relation to the regional situation, His Royal Highness on Wednesday last received a telephone conversation from the French President Emmanuel Macron and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He also held a telephone conversation with His Excellency General Joseph Aoun, the President of Lebanon. He also held a phone call with Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. In all these communications, the regional developments were the center of discussions, namely under the ongoing ceasefire and the ongoing escalation within the region. The Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs also received on Wednesday last a phone call from José Manuel Albayras, the Foreign Minister and European Cooperation of Spain, and Hakan Fidan, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, and Paulo Rangel, the Portuguese counterpart. Today, he received two telephone communications from Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, the Saudi Foreign Minister, and Dr. Ayman Safadi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Expatriate Affairs of Jordan. Yesterday, His Excellency received a phone call from Abbas Araghchi, the Foreign Minister of Iran, where he expressed during the call the necessity of all the parties to respond positively on the ongoing negotiations to pave the way to address the roots of the crisis through amicable solutions and result in a permanent agreement. Also reiterated the necessity to open all the waterways and not to use them as a pressure or bargaining, reiterating the negative impacts on the region, food and energy, global supplies, supply chains, and dire repercussions on the global peace and security. Today, he met with His Excellency Bishar Gold, the Turkish Defense Minister. The Minister of State, Mohammed bin Aziz Al Khalifi, met on Sunday last with Tom Barak, the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, where they examined the developments there, reiterating during the meeting Qatar's total support to Syria's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. Also, he held a phone call with Youssef Raji, the Lebanese Foreign Minister. His Excellency will head to Berlin to take part in the 3rd International Conference on the Sudan, which will be held tomorrow, Wednesday, April. It will shed light on the ongoing and growing humanitarian needs and means to reach amicable and solutions to the crisis in Sudan. That's all what we have in this week's briefing, and now I open the floor to questions. Al Jazeera television. Amid all the unfolding developments within the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, you reiterated that the Strait of Hormuz does not belong to a particular party. Is there a certain proposal to resolve the crisis, and where the discussions between Iran and Oman pave the way in coordination with the rest of GCC states? A second question on Lebanon. You spoke about two telecommunication with both the president and foreign minister. How do you comment on the discussions to be taking place between Lebanon and the U.S. in Washington today? Speaking of the Strait of Hormuz, we have repeated numerously that the crisis must be resolved at the regional level, and all the GCC states, namely those overlooking the Gulf, if not all the countries depending on the exports and imports within the supply chains within the waterway, must be part of the solution. That's why the solution must be at the regional level. However, it is still too early. We are still living a ceasefire. We are waiting for the war to come to its total end, and to also to steer us away from the brink of falling again into an all-out war. Our main concern is to focus on to maintain the ceasefire and translate it into a total permanent stability and peace. Speaking of the situation in Lebanon, the state of Qatar has repeatedly reiterated its solidarity with Lebanon, condemning all violations, namely the continued Israeli violations and airstrikes on Lebanese territories. However, as you may know, the state of Qatar has always made clear that crisis must be resolved through diplomacy and negotiating table. That's why we are endorsing all the global efforts, namely those initiated by Lebanon, in order to reach a de-escalation and put an end to the war and the continued violations against Lebanon and their territories. Spanish radio in Qatar. Thank you, Professor. As amid the growing reports that certain measures will impact the traffic in the Hormuz waterway, how Qatar consider any possible escalation on the future of supply chains, and is it the absence of a comprehensive dynamic on translating them into effective dynamics? I believe it has become clear about the consequences of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, be it in the prices of energy or even the prices of electricity and other fuels in all the world impacted by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. There are other economic consequences beyond that, namely the exports of the petrochemical materials, and we have touched the results in all the markets worldwide, and believe all these repercussions are no secret. Some of these repercussions are strategic. However, we reiterate that the Qatari economy is robust and is capable of enduring all these repercussions, and we will brave through this crisis, be it economic or else more robust. Speaking of the problem in the Strait of Hormuz, historically speaking, it has been a normal waterway where maritime vessels have been passing in and out for decades. There was no problem at any point of time in the past with respect to the management or the administration of the waterway. We are speaking of it as if it is as if it was an eternal problem. However, all the parties of the region must work together in order to ensure the security of the Strait of Hormuz, and as well as the security of the maritime traffic passing through this waterway. Qatar Radio. The first part of question, despite Qatar's clear position towards the Iranian attacks, Iran's threats still persist. What is your position in the face of these threats? A second question about the negotiations on Lebanon. Is Qatar playing a mediation role with respect to the mediation to put an end to the violations against Lebanon? Qatar's positions towards these threats has always been the same as was towards any violations in the past. We have always repeated that the rhetoric of intimidation, the rhetoric of threats, does not serve the purposes of any nation. In Qatar, we are still committed to defending our territories, and we will continue to condemn all forms of violations against our sovereignty, and we will address them in a manner that will ensure the security and well-being of our country. Communication, as I said, are ongoing with all the parties. Lebanon is a country which is important not only to the region. I cannot speak of a clear mediation role for the state of Qatar. However, coordination is underway with all the parties concerned.
Thank you so much, Doctor. With tourism dropping and events being canceled, Saudi Arabia having to postpone their Formula One race, what steps are GCC countries doing to prevent this conflict from triggering a broader economic shock?
Thank you. First of all, we are quite confident in the resilience of the Qatari economy and regional economy. We have seen through various challenges that our economy has endured and has actually flourished. And came out of a lot of challenges in our recent history even stronger and even more robust, including the reputational situation for our country internationally. And therefore, we are quite confident, very confident in the resilience of our country. Of course, this is an economic shock for the international community as a whole, for international economy as a whole, when it comes to energy market, when it comes to everything else. I won't stand here and say that there will not be an effect on our economy and on international economy. We have already seen that effect, but we have put every possible precaution in place. Contingencies are in place, and we are assessing the situation as we go along, but we remain confident in our economy and the stability of our economy and the stability of our fiscal and economic situation. Andrew?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Majed. The ceasefire has been in place now for nearing a week. One of the conditions of the ceasefire was that Hormuz would be open. No Qatari vessel, as I can tell, has transited Hormuz in the last week. Does Qatar feel that there's any urgency about the idea of opening Hormuz, because it doesn't seem to be perhaps one of the priorities on the list? And I guess maybe a second question would be about the talks in Islamabad next week and perhaps another round coming. Is there any plan for Qatar to be involved in these talks, either as a participant or as an observer or advisor? Qatar has, as you know, a lot of mediation experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. First of all, regarding the Strait of Hormuz, our call has been the same since the beginning of this conflict. The security of the Strait of Hormuz, the reality of the Strait of Hormuz cannot be harmed by any escalatory moves by any party. This is condemned internationally, and we have stood against any attempt to politicize or use the Strait of Hormuz in this conflict or any other conflict. And therefore, of course, we are calling for the immediate resumption of maritime activity through the strait, and we do not accept any pre-imposed conditions on opening the strait. We are, of course, aware of the need for a regional discussion, a regional solution when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, and this is why we are engaging with all our partners here in the region and beyond regarding the strait. And we are assessing, of course, and emphasizing to all of our partners the importance and the need to open that strait for international economy as a whole, not only for our economy. When it comes to the talks in Islamabad, we remain, in contact with our brothers in Pakistan who are leading this mediation. As you have seen, there has been a lot of calls and prospective visits from Pakistani officials and with the Qatari officials, and all of this is within this kind of coordination that the whole region actually is engaging with Pakistan. We applaud the efforts of Pakistan. We support their efforts. I am unaware right now of any specific role that we are playing beyond this support and the regional coordination that we are doing all together. And I would revert back to the Pakistanis on confirmation of holding these talks, but obviously, as we don't have any official confirmation yet, any assessment of the role of any other country, I think, is not part of the discussion at the moment. But I can assure you that right now we are supporting the Pakistani-led mediation. Callum?
Callum Baton, AFP. Dr. Majed, good to see you in this different setting.
Hopefully better setting.
Better, more parking. To follow up on Andrew's question, there are some reports that there will be fresh talks within days in Islamabad. That there are at least efforts to try and restart those. I just wonder if you could, you've mentioned it already in Arabic, but speak to the importance that those talks resume and reach some kind of a deal rather than the kind of fragile ceasefire that we see at the moment. And again, in a similar vein, is Qatar happy with the amount of a role that the Gulf countries have been given to play in these talks, given the direct and adverse impact that the war has had? Would Qatar like to see the Gulf playing more of a role in the future? And then one follow-up question on an old topic. There are talks, we understand, from Swiss authorities going on between the DRC and the M23 group. Can you tell us any more about that are overseen by Qatar but not taking place in Qatar? Can you tell us anything more about those talks, what they hope to achieve, and whether there can be a breakthrough given previous items on the agenda, including a ceasefire, and the exchange of prisoners hasn't been forthcoming?
Thank you very much, Callum. Regarding the talks in Islamabad, obviously, we are very supportive of these talks that have already taken place over there, and we are encouraged on any positive statements of resumption of these talks as soon as this weekend. But of course, we are waiting for the confirmation from the mediators, and we remain in contact with the mediators, with the parties of the talks, and finding a regional voice, working together to make sure that we are part of this. I would say that one important thing here, Qatar has stressed from the beginning, is that we need a comprehensive solution. This cannot be just a ceasefire and then we find ourselves back in the eye of the storm again. What we need is a comprehensive solution that addresses all the underlying issues, that addresses the concerns of the Gulf countries, addresses the concerns of regional partners, addresses the concerns of the international community, addresses the concerns of all peoples in the region, including the Iranians, and takes into account, of course, the prosperity and the security and the sovereignty of all countries involved. Regarding the role of the Gulf, I think there is a huge regional coordination machine that is in operation right now. If you do a calculation of the number of calls, meetings that have taken place in the past week, you'll see that generally speaking in the region, everybody's been talking to everybody about this, and I think the level of coordination is very high. Our concerns are collective, and they have been put in that collective basket in coordination with the mediators. But obviously the talks have certain parameters, and I would leave it to the mediators to discuss these parameters. Regarding the Swiss effort with Qatar on the mediation between DRC and M23 and Rwanda, I must say that we continue with that effort, and we believe in the process. We are very proud of what has been accomplished yet. We are aware of the challenges to implementing a lot of these agreements, but we are continuing with this effort. I don't have anything to report on right now when it comes to the nature of the talks, but I want to reassess our not only support for them, but our keen engagement in these talks.
Thank you so much. Two questions for you. The first is, do you feel that the U.S. blockade has complicated the situation, particularly for Qatar, but for the GCC in general? And then, in addition, I understand Qatar is having conversations with Iran. If you could shed some light on that. There's some reporting that there's discussions of money being released to improve relations. If you could touch on that as well.
Okay, so first of all, regarding the situation in the Strait right now, we have not been able to use the Strait normally since this war has started. This is not a new occurrence. What is happening right now is certainly not conducive of ending the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, but we have always said that there needs to be a sustainable solution that guarantees that no party is able or willing to block movement through the Strait. When it comes to the call between His Excellency the Prime Minister and the Iranian Foreign Minister. In the call, we reiterated our position in condemning any attacks on the sovereignty of Qatar or any neighboring country. We reiterated our support for the ceasefire, and we urged the Iranian side to engage fully in the talks, as we have said of the US and other parties. Other than that, I don't have anything to report. But let me say it for the record, very clearly. All of these attempts to tarnish the reputation of Qatar, or to show that Qatar is acting alone when it comes to dealing with the threat of this war, let me say it very clearly. We have always said from day one, we consider any attack on any of our neighbors in this region an attack on the sovereignty of Qatar, and therefore any solution is to be a regional solution in dealing with this threat. There has been absolutely no single-lined process with the Iranians since the war has started. The attacks on our countries have persisted and have only stopped with the ceasefire, including the last night before the ceasefire, and therefore we are continuing in coordinating with our neighbors, and there has been absolutely no money discussions on this. I have said it, on the record before. We are concerned with defending our country. We will defend our country against any attacks, and any talk of financially stopping these attacks is completely false, and it's just aiming to tarnish the reputation of my country. And what?
السلام عليكم. أنا وفي الخطيب من العرب الجديد. سعادتك عندي سؤال يعني أنتم كنتم تتحدثون.
I have a question. As you earlier stated, that Qatar will not get involved in the negotiations until assaults and strikes against Qatar and GCC are halted. Now, these attacks have ceased. Do we aspire for a future role for Qatar in the negotiations in Islamabad? A second question on a uniform, clear position by the GCC states with respect to the ceasefire and the Strait of Hormuz. When will we see the GCC states sitting at the negotiating table to be part and parcel of the final agreement between the US and Iran? To begin with, the situation we are living now is a ceasefire, and a ceasefire does not mean the end of war. We are closely monitoring and with apprehension, and we are closely following with the rest how the ceasefire will hold. This is not an end of war, and based on this characterization, of this definition, we cannot speak of a Qatari role until this matter is fully and clearly transpires. We have repeated numerously, we are coordinating with all our regional partners. You have seen the volume of communications and visits, and we are totally supporting our brothers in Pakistan in their mediation role. The mediation does not tolerate any more roles, and we are thankful for the role played by Pakistan, and we reiterate our support and endorsement to them. Again, I do not wish to speak on behalf of the mediators. They have a certain dynamic, a certain course of action, a certain roadmap, and they have phased goals. Once we cross the threshold meant to be for a permanent agreement, there will be a regional role. As I said earlier, the regional states cannot be ignored. They must be not only part and parcel of the solution, but a foundation stone therein. We are closely coordinating with the rest of GCC to have a clear and uniform position with the end of this war. Some talks about a bilateral agreement between the US and Iran to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Will the GCC states in future sit with both the countries to seek a permanent solution? Why not from now? Again, Qatar is not engaged in any mediation role. That's why all your questions should be addressed to the mediators. Here in Qatar, we have a high level of coordination with our brothers in Pakistan, with the United States, and with the other parties in order to have our concerns and our issues laid on the negotiating table. However, there are certain phases, and we respect the roadmap plan laid down by the Pakistani mediators, and we are fully supporting them, and in future will have a more clear vision thereof.
Amran Aryan, QBS Radio. Is there any suggested meeting between the GCC countries and Iran regarding to Hormuz Strait?
Thank you. Right now, of course, there is no such meeting. As we said, the attacks on our sovereignty in the region merit a more defensive response, which we have been successfully implementing since the start of the war. But as we have always said, the solution needs to be regional.
Hi, Dr. Majed Halim from Euronews. Previously, you mentioned Qatar cannot mediate while it's under attack. While we're in a ceasefire situation, and if it is extended, do you see Qatar's role as a mediator, Qatar being included as a mediator as these talks progress?
I'm not going to, to put a block on any future realities. I don't like to entertain hypotheticals, but what I could say always is that we are fully supportive of the Pakistani role and the Pakistani mediation. We are fully invested in defending our country and making sure that we get out of this crisis. And Qatar maintains its position in supporting peaceful resolutions to conflict, supporting peace facilitation and mediation as a whole. Slava?
You, Professor Al-Arabi TV. During the phone communication between the Qatari foreign minister and his Iranian counterpart yesterday, did they discuss only the negotiations and the progress thereof, or was there a demand from Qatar not to be targeted in future? Another question, is there any Qatari vessels that came under attacks from the Iranians? And with respect to the Strait of Hormuz, are there any future arrangements in order to resolve this crisis? And are there any alternatives for the state of Qatar to lessen their dependence on the Strait of Hormuz, like the Golden Pass project between the U.S. and Qatar, and also the coast of Congo, where gas reserves have been recently discovered? We do not have any reports that any Qatari vessels came under any assault over the past days. However, as is the case with all the vessels, we are all waiting for the Strait of Hormuz to be fully reopened. And with respect to any future arrangements, I repeat once again, we are still living a ceasefire. We did not reach the end of war. Once a permanent agreement conducive to the end of war, we all, as regional states and beyond, required to sit together in order to lay down permanent solutions that are suitable to the rights and concerns of all the parties within the region. And as part of your question about the alternatives, it is too early to speak about. Our main goal is to have the Strait of Hormuz reopened, which is sufficient to the resources, exports and imports of the region. Thank you, Professor. The GCC as a bloc, how could it be changed after the war? There are speculations about structural and organizational change. Are there any form of coordination, especially the threats from Iran would persist? And also the Strait of Hormuz, these issues were not foreseen. How would you deal with them in future? This question can be referred to the Secretariat General of the GCC. However, we are still working or operating within our uniform mechanism. We have expressed our total solidarity with the interest of our GCC. It is an ongoing situation. There are no need for any change into the bloc. It has been born in the first place to be a linchpin for the economic and security interest for our shared fate of all the GCC states. This has always been the case, and this is what is proved in the past. It has not been under any organizational or structural shock. To the contrary, it is now more needed by the GCC member states, and I believe this will continue in the future. Thank you, and see you next week.